Hello and welcome to another video. I'm Everett Hoffman, and today we're going to talk about the basics of aperture. So what is an aperture? An aperture is a mechanism that's inside of our lens that allows us to control the amount of light we let through our lens and onto our image sensor. And this mechanism works a lot like how our pupil does in our eyes. So when we're outside on a bright sunny day and there's a lot of light, our pupil becomes really small. And that's because it's closing down to limit the amount of light that we're allowing into our eye so we can still see on bright sunny days in a lot of light. Now on the other side of that, if we're in a dark room, then our pupil becomes bigger. And that's because it's opening up to allow more light in so we can see in the dark. And our aperture works a lot like our pupil does. So it's essentially the pupil or the iris to our camera. And your aperture is going to be measured on a number scale. So the higher the number, the smaller your aperture is going to be. Therefore, the less amount of light it's letting into your camera, making a darker image. Now, on the other side of that, the lower the number, the more open your aperture becomes, and therefore it's going to let more light in, and that's going to create a brighter image. So I brought my camera here so I can show you what your lens is actually doing with these numbers. So I've got my Rokinon 50mm prime lens here. So let's go ahead and see what the aperture range is on this guy. So we're closed down to 22, and we can open all the way up to 1.5. So what does our aperture look like at 22? And it looks like this. It's that tiny little hole there. And that means the higher the number, the smaller the opening, and the darker our image is going to be. So whenever we open it all the way to 1.5, the larger the opening, the more amount of light, and the brighter our image is going to be. So you can see how big that opening became. So here's again, 22, and all the way open to 1.5. So that's what our aperture looks like when we're controlling those numbers. But what does that look like on our camera? So right now, my aperture is set to 9. So let's go ahead and close it all the way down to 22. And this is how dark my image is going to be with my current camera settings. And remember, my aperture is as small as it can go right now. So I'm gonna go ahead and open it all the way to 1.5. And that means my image is going to become brighter and my aperture is going to become bigger. So let's go ahead and see what that looks like. Oh my God. So there's aperture at 1.5. Obviously it's super bright and it's probably hurting your eyes. So I'll go ahead and change it back down to where we should be. So that's an example of what your aperture is going to look like and how it affects your footage on your camera. So that covers the basics of using your aperture. Now there's one thing that we have to keep in mind when setting our aperture, and that greatly depends on what lens you're using. So the lens that I used in this video is known as a cine lens, or a manual lens. And what that means is I have to manually adjust the aperture of this lens. This lens will not talk to my camera, and my camera will not display what my aperture is on this lens. If I want to get that information, I have to use the numbers on the side of the lens. The other type of lens, or the most commonly used lens, is a lens like this. And this lens allows me to manually adjust my focus, and it also allows me to manually adjust my focal length. But it does not allow me to manually adjust my aperture. This lens talks to my camera, and my camera will display what the aperture is. And if I want to control the aperture of this lens, I have to do that through a camera setting. So that's all I got for this one. Tune in next week when I cover how your aperture affects your depth of field. Let me know in the comments below what your favorite aperture setting is. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this. Smash that bell to be notified when I post another video. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next one.